Is this you? Or maybe this? Or perhaps this Rex?
Are you sick of dying over and over again, and then you blame it on lag, broken mechanic, or balance issues, and then you write a whole ass paragraph in the balance feedback in the official Isle Discord because you think you understand balance even though the only carnivore you play is Trudon? Well, you're in the right place. Today we're making the ultimate Isle Evrima Combat Guide. What a name. So this is gonna be a bit different from my other usual videos. For starters, I'm actually talking. Yeah, and secondly, this is a guide. I guess I have made one guide before, but I've had a lot of people asking me for a proper PvP guide or asking about specific matchups, and honestly I kept putting it off aside because I wasn't really sure how to tackle a topic this big, because combat in this game is like more complicated than just walking up and fighting. But I think I finally got a decent way to explain the core things about combat in this game. And now I already know there's gonna be someone in the comments saying,
But PvP isn't the point of the Isle, it's a survival game.
and honestly, like, stop crying and get good. Every survival game has PvP, and why would you not want to get better at a game where dying can literally erase hours of your life because you're worse than your opponent? So if you guys see someone saying that, honestly just gatekeep this video from them and let them keep donating free meals because they're never gonna get better. So the Isle combat, well, it is true that it's mostly a buggy mess, and sometimes it do be just pure rage bait, but oh, when it actually works, it is a thing of beauty. You don't get that rewarding feeling anywhere else when you kill an apex herbivore with like a pack of small carnivores. Nothing can match that. And the most satisfying part, you actually know that behind the screen of the person you just killed, you know you have made them lose hours of their lives. Like, combat in this game is genuinely so much more fun than something like Path of Titans, in my opinion, where you always have to tank some hits and face tank and stat check your opponent, and there's not really complex mechanics, and you don't really want to face tank in the Isle. I've had this game since progression game mode, when it was a thing, on a map called Region 2. There were also mods. I've seen them add the survival game mode on all the old maps, and I've been there since Evrima first came out as well, on and off of course. You had only Tenno in Utah, and I have to say in general, despite its flaws, combat has come a really long way. Experience. So the first thing you need to understand is combat isn't something you're gonna master after one video. It just doesn't work like that. With time, you will learn how players will act, you learn to read their body language, what kind of playstyle they have, are they easy to bait, or maybe they're too confident, do they adapt fast? If yes, you might have to switch things up. You also have to understand that in survival there can be hundreds of different scenarios. I'll get into that in the end as well. One fight might be against someone who's never touched combat or his mouse before. The next fight could be against one of the best players in the game. Sometimes it is a clean 1v1, sometimes you get ganged by 10 herbivores, because for some reason that's still allowed in all the most popular unofficial servers. Another thing is that you also get different playstyles even if you face the same species. There are aggressive playstyles, there are defensive players, there are clueless players, and there are players that will read every move you do. You simply cannot prepare for every situation. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk some combat. So for this guide, I've split combat into 4 main topics. First is movement, second is mechanics, third one is combat details. I don't know why I named it, I guess I didn't have a good name. And fourth one is general survival tips. If you understand these 4 things, you will already be a better player than most people you run into. But before we get into those, every player needs to do one thing first. Go to settings, go to gameplay, and turn on manual alt. You never want to have that off, because that means every attack you do outside of running will be a directional attack, and you don't want that. It ruins your timings, it ruins your movement. Unless you're Stego, basically. And in some cases Maya too. I know some good Maya players that do that, but otherwise change that. I genuinely don't know why it's off by default. It really just is a noob trap. So yeah. So our first topic, movement. This is kind of the core thing that makes the difference between a good player and a great player. You have to outmaneuver and bait in this game. You can't really go in blindly against especially larger opponents. This is why turning, speed and sliding stats are arguably the most important stat a playable can have whenever a new one is added. If your animal is turning like a truck and has slow ult attacks, no matter how much HP or damage you have, you're eventually gonna die to a patient hunter. To understand how we have to move, we have to first understand the different types of movement styles among the playables. We have the tight turners, we have the sliders, we have the sparring movement, and we have the outliers that don't really fit into any category. And I'll explain them in detail now. Firstly, we have the tight turners, the stuff that turns well when they're moving. Stuff like Raptor, Turon, Sarah, Tana, Rex, and probably some other ones that I'm forgetting. You have a tight turning radius with these guys when you're moving. I don't mean when standing still and then like spinning, but rather when running or trotting, when walking. You bait by moving unpredictably, closing in and weaving around your opponent, dodging attacks, and then when there's an opening, you go in. You don't need to constantly run. That's something I've observed a lot. For some reason, less experienced players tend to constantly run around the target, kinda ruining their turn and timings and making them more predictable. You can honestly just stand still if you don't need to run, if there's nobody chasing you, for example, or if you don't need to dodge an attack. Even a lot of Isle content creators I've seen with supposedly thousands of hours do this. They're like constantly running around after getting a hit, and they run super far away for some reason. Like they can just stand still and stay behind the opponent or at their weak spots. Like on the screen, just stand still, wait for an opening, and then go in. Second type of movement we have are the sliders. These are the stuff like Carno, Aloe, also Dilo, kinda, although it is slide is kinda bad, and Maya. The stuff that don't have a tight turning when they are moving, but they have a slide to boost their agility a bit. The way you bait with these guys is that you act like you're gonna run in blindly most of the time, okay? But at the last second, you stop, you let them do an attack, or you can even buy if you have high attack speed like Dilo, because for some reason opponents tend to get baited even more when you bite, even if it's not near them. And then you run. When they attack, you run in, and if they don't attack, usually you're fast enough to get a hit and then run past them before getting hit. So they do kind of have to predict you, because if they don't, they get hit. If they do, and if they do it too early, you get a hit after their opening. And some little trick to Dilo is that you can actually crouch and turn, like I'm doing on the screen while fighting this Dano. And yeah. Then there's the sparring movement. Sparring is honestly the best movement you can get. You can literally move omnidirectionally, especially on something like Dibble. You can slide, you turn well, you can move freely and get hunters off your back by changing directions to punish them. let them lose their footing and get in front of you accidentally, and then you flip them. It's also the best moment style to bait, arguably, because for example as Diablo versus Stego has to kind of predict, and you can go back and forth baiting it, and it will take the bait most of the time. There's also other types of movement that kind of fall in between these categories. For example, Stego, it doesn't have a slide or a good turn, but since you use your tail to attack, for example, you can utilize Z-walking and turn even tighter, and you can change your direction suddenly to catch predators off guard and you smack them. So baiting, what is baiting? It's the movement we do without going in to make our opponent use their attacks and preferably not hit us. A quick little note about baiting: unless your opponent is once again an actual bot, they aren't going to take the bait if you bite from super far. You actually have to act believable. Act like you're actually gonna go in, get close enough to make them think they can hit you, but you can also far enough that you can react fast enough before you actually get hit. In some cases, you will actually have to take risks while baiting, because not everyone is super trigger happy. You have to get well within their range to act believable and make them actually swing. Another thing to note is that you don't actually have to go in yourself after a bait in a pack. You have to understand team play as well. Sometimes you can bait but let your teammate shine and get a hit. This is especially what you should do with sliders, for example, because generally speaking, even if you bait a hit successfully, you likely won't be in position for a punishing hit, but with two of you, one can bait and the other can hit. For example, with two Karnas, this works super well. On the other side of the coin, and when you're the one defending, you have to be patient to not get baited. That is pretty easy to do, honestly. It's not easier said than done. It is easy to do. Just don't panic, let them make mistakes. You're the one defending, they have to come to you anyway. Wait for a slip up, they will definitely do that. They will get too close and you can punish that. So the next big topic, mechanics. And before we get into that, we have to first talk about the tab screen. And I know a lot of people complain about me spamming the shit out of tab. And yes, I'm aware it has kind of become a reflex because you used to be able to see your health before, and technically you can still learn how to read it to know how low you are with the help of the wounded status. So you get the wounded status when you're below half health, and if you don't have the wounded status, that means you're above half health. Easy. So the other thing with wounded is that it lowers your bite force, yeah? And if you look at your bite force, if you read your bite force on top, and if you know your normal bite force when you're healthy, not wounded, you get half your bite force when you're at 10% health. Okay, so you can kind of use the numbers in between, like the gap in between, to gauge how low you approximately are. So if you're a Sarah, right, full grown 150 bite force, if you're at 10% health, you have 75 bite force, and anything in between, if you're 130, you're kind of closer to yellow health, so you're closer to half health, and if you're like 90, you're basically almost dead. So you can use that. For this topic, I do apologize if the order is kind of all over the place, but I decided to start with bleed or blood or whatever. Bleed is the most important combat mechanic probably, aside from stamina, but I won't talk about it. First off, how to check your blood accurately. It is by pressing enter and dragging your mouse over. You used to be able to do this in the tab screen, but it got removed. This is also the way to check your stamina, hunger, water, and diets. So not all attacks do bleed, obviously. It has to be with like a sharp tool, I guess, like teeth or claws, or a thagomizer. And yeah, so the amount you bleed is affected by your movement state, firstly. So if you're sprinting, it's 3x bleed damage, so it's a lot. Swimming and trotting is 2x. Standing still is 1x bleed damage, and Z walking is 1.5x. So if you're sprinting, you will bleed out the fastest. It increases the ticks you take, but not the bleed duration. The bleed duration is affected by your food, water, health, and your stamina. So at the time, whatever stat you have when you receive the bleeding attack, for example an aloe claw, if my food and water is almost 0, I'm gonna be bleeding almost double the amount of the duration that I would be bleeding normally with full health, full food, full water, full everything. Okay? And so keep that in mind before you get into fights. That's why it's really important to have your food and water always full, unless you're planning to use gastro. I'll get into that later. And of course, sitting down lowers the amount you bleed the most. You will be bleeding half the amount, I'm pretty sure. And you can use mud to clot your wounds. So if you have mud and if you sit down at the same time, you basically don't bleed at all. Another thing to note about mud is that the rain will wash it off. So if you're under open plains and it's raining and you try to mud and surprised that it's not working, it's because the rain washes the mud off, so you won't get any bleed resistance from the mud. However, they recently patched it, I'm pretty sure. If it's raining and you're still in a cave and use mud in the cave, the devs did say that it won't be washing off anymore in certain circumstances, so that might work. I didn't test it yet, but go for it. Also, like I said, if your health is lower, you also bleed more, hence why something like Sarah that does good damage also does good bleed, because it lowers your health at the same time. Having low blood affects your stam, but also your health regen. Even when you have a plus, if your blood pool is really low, you're gonna regen a hell of a lot less. And of course, once your blood is between 10 and 0%, your vision is gonna get darker and you're ultimately gonna die. And a tip for the vision getting darker is that you can actually turn off your HUD with F10 to see around you while you're bleeding out. And lastly, blood heal also ramps up, just like health or stamina, the longer you sit down until it reaches a certain cap. Blood is basically a health pool. It matches the weight your creature has normally, unless your creature has a resistance by default. So stuff like Sarah, for example, it has 60% bleed resistance if it's above a certain health threshold. I'm not sure the exact number. Dino has a 50% bleed resistance. Ceratopsins like Diablo and Trike have 25% innate bleed resistance. And anything else, unless I'm missing something, should have the same amount of blood they have as their health. So stuff like Maya, for example, I see a lot of people talking about, oh, Maya is really vulnerable to bleed, use that against it. But it's just not true. It's the same as any other playable. And especially, for example, a Prime Maya with 5.4 ton HP, you're gonna be taking a long time trying to bleed that thing. So remember that. So the blood pool is the same as your weight, okay? Just like health. Another mechanic we have is pouncing. Currently Omni, Turon, Aloe, and the newly added Ostro can do this. Their pounces work slightly different with what they can do and cannot do. For example, Raptor can alternate between raw damage and bleed, which is useless on Raptor, never use that. Turon only deals venom and damage when it first latches on, so it doesn't do anything else after. The longer you latch on doesn't change anything. Aloe does both damage and bleed at the same time, but cannot change its pounce slots. Also, pouncing cancels some attacks for some reason, which makes Turon and Omni, or I guess Aloe as well, stronger than they should be. Like you line up a juicy alt attack, but then you get pounced and it gets completely nullified. It's kind of like a parry, but that's something extra. Pouncing can also initiate a pin, which depends on certain requirements. You can check Kuga's video for that, because I'm lazy to explain the math. They do really good videos to explain game mechanics, aside from the occasional misinformation. But one thing to note though, when you're watching the videos, I do not recommend watching the combat sections of her guides, okay, of the dino guides, because, how do I put it nicely? Everyone involved are completely clueless about what they're doing and they just suck, okay? Avoid the combat parts. Anyway, back to pinning. Once you're pinned, you better pray to the Isle gods, because unless something third parties or they run out of stem, you just die. And knowing the Isle, the first one, a third party is much more likely to happen than your pouncer running out of stem. So how do we counter this pouncing and not get pinned? There are 3 things you can do: water, certain terrain, and bucking. Water is very effective, but it requires you to swim and causes the pouncers to drop in the water. They're not always open for attacks. And guess what? There is not always water nearby. And guess what again? Water usually has crocs in it. So, main counter is bucking. I mean, come on guys, like I still see people that don't know about bucking in the big 26. You buck by holding E. It seems that it recently got reworked. It used to be completely RNG. Now most playables buck pouncers off in like 5 seconds, whereas Kentro and Stego, they take 10 seconds, probably because they're harder to pounce. But yeah, there's that. Also, you can buck while doing any sort of movement. For example, while running, while trotting, while standing. It does not affect anything regarding the bucking timer, so it's better to do it while you're running, for example. But overall, it's better to always use terrain, because when you drop the pouncer off with terrain, they get stunned for a little second, they do a little hop, and they're open for a hit. And lastly, for this big topic, let's talk about mutations. Honestly, fuck survival mutations, okay? If you're winning fights and surviving, you won't need some loser ass, oh, it slows down food drain, that must be good, mutation, alright? So the mutations you must always pick are epidermal, congenital on anything that's not Trike or Rex or Dino, tactile endurance for Tenno and above size herbivores, osteosclerosis for land apexes. Gastro region for both carnivores and herbivores are a must-have as well. And a small tip for gastro: regardless of the food size you eat, you heal the same amount. So let's say a normal chunk that gives you 11% food normally, it heals 5%, yeah? A tiny organ from a baby Trudon, for example, also heals 5% of your HP. So you can utilize that to heal without eating too much. For example, if your food is close to full. If your stomach is higher than 87%, you normally don't get any healing. That's why you want to avoid being above that threshold if you want to eat by healing food. Okay? That's where the usefulness comes from eating small food. And it's the same thing with fruits for herbivores. It's honestly even more OP for herbivores because it doesn't have to be diet. Fruits are everywhere. It just has to be food that's not grass, and they can heal an absurd amount. Damage mutations like hemomania, hypermetabolic, and accelerated prey drive, I don't really think they are as valuable as the ones that I have mentioned above. So unless it's after an entombment, They also don't work on certain abilities, like dialogue clones, for example, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't work on pounce as well. That's why they're not as useful as the other ones that are kind of crucial for your survival. So, yeah. Finally, now that big section was over, let's get into the next big topic, which is details in combat. I don't know why I named this one that, but I guess I couldn't find anything better. So, yeah. Aiming and locational damage. So aiming actually exists in this game because we have locational damage. You can actually flick your mouse and intentionally prioritize hitting a certain spot of an animal, such as their weak spot for an extra damage or spots that are safe. Although there's like a anti-cheat fail-safe thing in this game that's like stopping certain amounts of damage from registering. That's why, for example, something like Cantro or Stego have non-existent headshot hitboxes against most abilities currently. You also have to learn the openings of each playable. Some have very little, some have very long where you can go in freely. For example, Stego's front and back ults take long, or Cantro power swing, or Trike Diablo ults and trash. They have big openings. You learn these by, once again, just practicing and observing. Usually the way I tackle fights in survival is that for the first part of a fight, I don't commit to a playstyle. I try to first observe, try to bait and see how they react, try to get as much information about my opponent as I can, and then I commit. Sometimes players are good at switching up, however, so you have to try new things. If a player is easy to bait and you do the same bait over and over again and eventually they stop getting baited, for example, you might have to just go in blindly and get a hit. It is risky, but it mixes things up and may cause them to get easily baited again. Most of the time, players don't change much though in survival, especially if someone is really easy to bait and keep hitting their tail, for example, on the same tree over and over again. Usually they don't pass the IQ threshold to get better during a single fight, and you'll win. For ult attacks, for the love of God, I also see way too many players that are running away from something, very obviously looking behind, so it's like you can tell they're gonna ult, and they always do when the pursuer comes close enough, and guess what? They always miss. Ults are a very important part of the game. They stop tail riding, but the way you're supposed to use ults isn't like, oh, there's something behind me or on my side, let me just do an ult and hope it hits. No. You have to be patient, just like with anything else, and also try to predict where they're going to move. For example, in this clip of me playing Stego, I don't use my ult where the raptor is coming from because it's too slow. I use the way it's actually going to go, so I get a hit. Also, usually very punishing to miss on most stuff, unless you're something like Maya or Kentro. They have really short openings, so you better make them count. And now our last big section, general survival tips. I want to start this one off by once again saying survival situations can be very different than what you practice. There's more stakes in dirty play, it's not always a fair 1v1, and you need experience in both practicing on something like Oasis and in survival to understand what I mean. Everyone can use terrain in survival, for example. There's no shame in it, although it is annoying to face because I understand nobody wants to lose hours of their progress to some rats that they think they're better than you. Camping is indeed gay, but dying is even gayer. That's what I say. So you should always try to have an advantage and also pick your fights unless you do some dumb shit like me for content sometimes. Water is also effective, for example, if you're something with long legs. At spots where you can run, your smaller opponents can only trot or even force to swim, so you can use that really wisely. You can also utilize the new hill slide or hill mechanics in survival really well too. Like quadrupeds get slowed down less, and you can use it to your advantage against carnivores because it really hurts their agility. In survival, you should also act confident even when you're not, but you should also be really confident. Even until the last second, try to avoid panicking, because that's genuinely the real killer. When you start panicking and spamming, you'll be surprised how fast everything crumbles. Just reposition, take a deep breath, and concentrate again. After enough fights, you'll get used to your heart racing during combat in survival. Panicking also results in doing accidental attacks as well. Like, I see way too many players spamming their keys like it's gonna do more damage or something, resulting in giving an opening, like the countless strikes and dibbles everyone sees thrashing constantly. Like, calm down with your clicks, like holy shit guys. And it also deals less damage to non-knockdown targets, by the way, these thrashes. Also, lastly, for this topic, you gotta just accept some matchups are unfair. If you can escape, try to do that, but in survival sometimes you just die. It doesn't mean you suck or anything, it's just the way it is, because ultimately it is a survival game and not a fighter PvP game. Like, you're just cooked if you find a trio of Carnos, a solo Dilo, or if you see a Rex that can pin you as a Stego. In some cases you can't even escape, but it just do be like that sometimes. So I also have some beginner PvP playable recommendations as well for survival. Of course, stuff like Galley, Hipsy, Dryo, Herrera, Ostro, and Ptera are a thing if you want to just survive and spectate and not fight and just keep killing juvies. Although Herrera is actually quite a capable bleeder. I do have an old video where we hunted several full-grown Stegos with a pack. But aside from those little guys, for Carnivore, I would recommend Carno and Serra. They're both very simple to play and strong. Especially Carno is very survivable as well because of its speed, but also absurdly broken until they fix the standing ram doing CC. Serra is also very strong if you learn how to bait and move well, hopefully after this video. It's easy to grow because of the fact that you can do anything and have crazy sand range. I would also argue Dino and Trudon are very easy playables. There's a reason why your favorite Croc or Trudon YouTuber sucks whenever they switch to playing something else, no offense. Trudon is easy to grow if you find something dead after spawning. You just set, easy to play because Venom Vision impairment is busted. You take literally no risks with bounces because for some reason, like I said before, they parry alt attacks. You're very hard to see and hit, and you deal very good damage actually, especially in packs. You can also change bounce slots now. All you need to do is just not blindly dismount, literally just bait before you pounce, which is easy to do thanks to your agility, and change your dismount timer to not get predicted, and congrats, now you're the best Trudon player ever. And for Dino, you have a grab that's simple enough, and on land, unless you come across other apexes, if you're not a bot and spam your ults, you'll be fine. Underwater combat is actually very simple as well. Try getting headshots and preferably stay under your opponent. Like I said, most Dinos suck anyway, and if you're slightly better at PvP, you'll beat them. 2v1 is a bit hopeless though. Anyway, let's move on to the beginner herbies. Paki, literally the most beginner PvP dino in my opinion. Simple enough, you destroy anything you can knock down with a headbutt and fracture. A tip, don't always hold the right mouse button, but use tap rams as well because they're easier to land and you don't have that limited timing. Once you get a head fracture or a leg fracture, it's basically over for them. Other than Patchy, herbies are very easy to grow, but not gonna lie, kinda harder to play sometimes because they have more attacks in general. Stego is pretty easy as long as you don't get baited, easy to grow as well. Unless you come across a big Rex or aggro dibbles, you're basically immune to anything after like 10 minutes after the sank. Diablo is also not too bad if you learn the controls. Like I said, there are way too many Diablos that don't know what their attacks are and just spam thrash or ults. Avoid trike at all costs though, that shit is legit the hardest playable in the whole game. The movement is much more difficult compared to Diablo. You have to know all your combos, like with going in and out of sparring as well. And you have to play frame perfect against a competent Rex, because Rex just needs 4 crushes and then it's over for you. Also, not to mention, you insta-die to a Rex throughout your whole growth until your peak prime, because for some reason you cannot stun a Rex even if it's just 1 kilo heavier than you, so there's that. Also, beginners should avoid Maya as well. It has a steep learning curve, but if you like the creature and you just give it some time, I'm sure you can get better. In the end, it's always practice and mastering your playable. I do recommend maining a single playable first before branching out, because there will be overlaps among how a dino plays as well. So when you're good at something like Omni, for example, you'll do good as a Serra or a Turon as well, because their agility is kind of similar the way you play as well. Back in the day, we didn't have any free admin unofficial servers, so you would just hop on your favorite official server and die and die and die until you learn from your mistakes. Like, people really need to learn from their mistakes in this game, because it's just trial and error, honestly. That's one of the biggest things that piss me off, watching players that constantly keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And there's actually a lot of content creators that do that too, and people still praise them for being good at PvP, which is funny when they're watching the same guy with 20 attacks back to back as a stego falling for the same exact bait. If something isn't working, you have to switch it up. No good player in this game, or any game for that matter, is born with the skill. Yeah, there are some godlike players like yours truly that learn very fast, but it's honestly just experience. I have several friends or players I know spend their whole day fighting on a server like Oasis, which, I'm gonna be honest, I do get bored after like 30 minutes of practice. I did used to practice far more before, but it does get boring. But those guys will always be better than 99% of your average survival player, just because they practice a lot. Last but not least, never kill babies or crash players unless it's on Petit Pete, because all of them deserve to die, in game of course. All of this should be generally future proof, unless they drastically decide to change the core mechanics or do some unfathomably dumb balance change, which with these guys you may never know. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll be there to answer any questions in the comments as well, and honestly sorry if this was a bit all over the place, because I genuinely didn't know how to tackle it properly. As always, see you next time. Remember to like and subscribe, guys. Holy shit, that was cringe. Cut it. But anyway, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.